Jammu, over which all people, irrespective of their party affiliation, they agree. As things have developed during the past few years, almost all political parties, they have banged upon him to launch their new movements or to garner support from the people. So what kind of a man and what kind of a king was he? I'll take you back to the day when he passed away, 26 April 1961. The news broke over All India Radio, and it so happened that I was a young boy in my 15th year. I too happened to be in Samba at that time. So I have seen how the people in that area reacted. I am not witness to what happened in Jammu. That I read long after the event from the account given by Colonel Bhagwan Singh, former ADC of Maharaja Hari Singh. He says that when the news broke, people naturally, they were upset. Voluntarily, all shops, everything was shut down. And all of them, they walked towards the palaces to mourn the death of their last Maharaja. But it so happened that nobody was there at the palace. Yuvraj Karan Singh was in Rome. The Maharani Sahiba was in Kangra. So the dilemma of the people was, how do they mourn? To whom they express their sorrow? With whom they share? And then ultimately the whole of the Pandit Premnath Dogra's residence. And then under his leadership, people walked towards the cremation ground, the Jogi Ghat, Jogi Darwaza. They went on the banks of River Tavi, and barring the funeral, they performed all other rites. They had their bath there, and then quietly they came back. So it was a strange kind of a mourning procession. The dead body was not there. The main mourners were not there. The king had been appropriated by the people of Jammu that day. The government of the day in the state refused to mourn his death. State radio continued its program as usual. Students were annoyed, angry, and there was firing also. They rushed to the secretariat to bring down the flag, the new state flag, and many arrests were made. This is my first memory of Maharaja Hari Singh, first and last rather. After that, whatever I learnt about him was through the books. This man must be possessing numerous qualities to evoke such strong emotions among the people. Reading about him and the times, I came across Sardar K.M. Panekar's this comment in British policy towards Indian states. The resident will be glad to learn that on his arrival near Cochin, the Raja will find it convenient to wait upon him. This is a message sent by the resident of Travancore, Cochin, to the Raja there that he was arriving in his state. And since he was arriving, therefore the Raja should come out of the state at a particular point to welcome the resident. This was the power of the resident. Maharaja Hari Singh, as it turned out, was not the one to be browbeaten by the residents. Very obvious that the princes could survive only by towing the line of the resident or by keeping him in good humor. Maharaja Hari Singh refused to do both. One of the first acts upon becoming the king was that he ordered that the Union Jack be pulled down from Srinagar. The resident refused, and a platoon of the army had to be sent there to get the flag down. Ultimately, the issue was resolved, and it was agreed that the flag would remain in Srinagar. But in Jammu, the resident would not be staying there. He used to stay in Sialkot during the winter. Captains moved to Jammu. His effort was to reclaim the authority which Gulab Singh and Maharaja Ranveer Singh had. They had full authority over their land, and all the people living in that land came under the judicial purview of that particular state. This was one of the first acts which Maharaja Hari Singh did, that the law of the land would be applicable to all people, whether they were British Indian citizens or of some other place. This was a radical act. He also, one can say, committed another blunder, or he tread upon the toes of a very powerful empire. When during the Round Table Conference, he made a speech. That speech, I don't think anybody has that full speech. There are only few lines. When I was working on Maharaja Hari Singh, from Jawaharlal Nehru Museum and Library, there I found this part of the speech. And I'm sure that people exaggerate many, they attribute many other words and sentences which are not correct. What he effectively said was that, I'll read it out for you. As Indians and loyal to the land of our birth, we stand as solidly as the rest of our countrymen for our enjoyment of a position of honor and equality in the British Commonwealth. But even this was radical for the times. Nobody said that Indian states, Indian people have a very honorable place under the empire. Under the empire, people had what the empire was pleased to give them. So these two things, they set the entire course of his reign. The pulling down of the Union flag and the Round Table Conference speech. Though I do not find anything offensive in his speech, but still it was considered offensive and radical at that time. Along with these things, the Maharaja introduced a number of things. He declared justice was his religion, which meant that religion, as we understand, was not going to play any part in the deliverance of justice in his rule. This was later slightly modified because it had to be modified. Till then, he was bent upon meritocracy, that jobs will be given only on the basis of merit and nothing else. But after 1930, there was a slight change. There was reservation for the Muslims. As boons for his Raj Tilak, he gave, he allowed the villages to have extra 100% of the Shamlat land. The Shamlat Deh land of the government would be transferred to the villages. As one of now this, if we analyze it carefully, benefits only the Kashmiris, because Shamlat Deh was only in Kashmir and not in Jammu. How it was not in Jammu, that is a separate issue. We can talk about it sometime later. But primarily it benefited the Kashmiris. And who was in majority in Kashmir? The Muslims were in majority in Kashmir. So this act was beneficial to them. He also introduced Land Alienation Act. Land Alienation Act, this protected the tenants from being dispossessed. Most of the tenants in the state were Muslims. So again, the beneficiaries were Muslims. And who were bent upon dispossessing them of their land? Mostly the money lenders. And who were the money lenders? Mostly Hindus. Officially, the Muslim cannot indulge in usury. So there is no question of there being money lender openly. He also introduced the agriculturist relief regulation. According to this regulation, the maximum interest which an agriculturist debtor could be charged was 12%, provided the total interest charge did not exceed 50% of the amount. This act was long before Sir Chotu Ram introduced such an act in Punjab, and which everybody reads in history books, the kind of reforms which were carried out before 1947 in Punjab. Again, this land, this benefited the Muslims, and at the receiving end were the Hindus, because they were the money lenders. Interestingly, in 1930, the revenue of the state began to fall. So one of the first acts which Maharaja Hari Singh did was that he had his personal jagirs of Bhadrawa and Laget, both of which were inherited by him from his father Raja Amar Singh, and not from the Maharaja of that time, Maharaja Pratap Singh. The revenue from this land was approximately 23 point something lakhs of rupees every year. He surrendered that income to the state so that the state did not suffer the losses. We will see later when this issue was brought up by Maharaja in his letter addressed to Sardar Patel. He also introduced other reforms. It must be noted that One creditable thing that the British had done was that they had taken Maharaja Hari Singh under his control as a young boy. His father had died when he was young, and his education was under the supervision of the British. So he had that egalitarian attitude towards life. He wanted to do good. He wanted to bring not only justice but also socio-economic changes in his land. As a first step, he introduced compulsory education, then known as Jabran Talim. It was free, and in all primary schools, all municipal towns of the state, this was made compulsory for the boys. One can argue that why not the girls, but then we cannot uh, judge the past by our present standards. Let us judge past by the standards that were prevailing then and not what they are today. Schools in 1925, the number of those schools was 706 in the whole of the state. By 1945, they had risen to 2,728. It's a phenomenal jump considering the times and considering the far-flung areas of the state, particularly Jammu, which means that a large number of people who could not have access to education because of the distances, they could now get some access from uh, from schools nearer to their homes. He also gave special grants for education. Special grants for backward classes as well as the Muslims and also the Sikhs. Sikhs were a tiny minority, mostly trading. So to give them exposure to the new kind of life, uh, they were also encouraged to imbibe new education. Hospitals, one of the finest hospitals of those times was built in Srinagar and in Jammu. They were well equipped with equipment were available at that time. We can still walk through the corridors of those hospitals and just transport ourselves during that time and can imagine that they must have been really good. The female wards were separate and the maternity wards were also introduced there. He also abolished Begad system. One could ask anybody from the lower classes to do some government work without paying anything except for, I think, a token food or something like that. This was humiliating. He abolished it. That's a different matter. That abolishing anything by law is one thing, and actually seeing it in practice is another. It took a long time actually for this practice to be abolished. As a young child, I have seen that it existed even in Jammu. He also opened the temples for all castes. And as you might have heard, Dr. Karan Singh often he narrates the story he must have heard that how the Pandit of Raghunath Mandir, he was asked to leave his job if he was unable to open the temple doors for the lower classes. And he did leave, and his brother was appointed the chief priest there. In education, let me also remind you that look how things change. In Shri Pratap College, Srinagar, in 1920-21, there were only 22 Muslim students. There were 192 non-Muslims. In 1925-26, the number of the Muslims rose to 69, and those of non-Muslims rose to 345. So this was a change which had already begun during the times of Maharaja Pratap Singh. These figures are from that era. The number from 22 within 5 years, 22 to 69, that's a jump. In 1929-30, when Maharaja Hari Singh was in firm control, the number of Muslim students rose to 93. That of non-Muslims, 453. Both have increased, but the rate of increase of Muslim students is higher than that of the non-Muslims. Now let me add one thing here, that once education is there and it is available to people and people do get education, then their aspirations also rise. And when the aspirations rise, what they need is that there should be job opportunities when they come out of the college or the university. Unfortunately, the job opportunities did not match the rising number of students in the state, particularly the Kashmir Valley. A new class had emerged, the Muslims, who were educated, but they were not getting jobs. And if they were getting jobs, they were lowly jobs. And anyone who has studied in, say, university like Aligarh Muslim University, then he has a different kind of aspirations at Sheikh Abdullah. This mismatch between the rising number of education and the stagnated nature of the jobs always creates problems everywhere. That is why all governments face this challenge of creating new opportunities. In 1930, this problem began to simmer. The educated Muslim class had begun to think, to talk, and feel agitated. This is how the reading room, Muslim reading room, came up in Srinagar. Educated class led by Sheikh Muhammad Mirza Afzal Beg, Ghulam Muhammad Sadiq, they were all there. Unfortunately, this class was educated, but at that point of time, they were also communalist. Let us not ignore this fact, that communalism was part of it. And this agitative mood which was building up in the state was exploited. By whom it was exploited, it is very difficult to say with a great degree of confidence, because it could be the British who were annoyed with Maharaja Hari Singh for two reasons: for bringing down the Union Jack and for championing justice for the people of India. Anything is possible. But the fact, I'll narrate the facts, it's for you to judge who did it or what happened. A man called Abdul Qadir, he accompanied a European to Srinagar. since he was he was a British Indian citizen and he was accompanying a European, therefore there was no bar on him. But he was an agitator. And finally, he made a speech at the Friday prayer denouncing the Maharaja and alleging that Muslims of Jammu, they were stopped from offering their Friday prayers, and that their chief priest had been barred from reading out the khutbah, and also that torn pages of Quran had been found in the toilets. Now these allegations, they were serious allegations and they must have caused great agitation among the people, emotional upheaval among the people of Kashmir or anywhere for that matter. The result was that the Maharaja had to arrest Abdul Qadir. Abdul Qadir was put in jail, and then there was this case, but the case could not be heard in an open court because so many people crowded the place, raising slogans all along. So ultimately, the court had to be held in the jail. But even there, the people rushed towards the jail gates, trying to break it open. As a result of which, firing took place in which 13 people were killed on 13th of July. This is the day which till last year had been commemorating as a Martyrs' Day, a cause of division, friction between Jammu and Kashmir. With this happening, obviously the British were taking keen interest, and Lahore had always been interested in the happenings of Kashmir. There were a number of Kashmiris who had migrated to Punjab from time to time. They were well-to-do, but they were still connected with their roots, like Muhammad Iqbal, Allama Iqbal, and they had formed a Kashmir committee also. They wanted, what they said was justice to the Muslims. A commission was instituted, the Glancy Commission. This commission heard everybody, including what had happened to the Pandits during this period. Before the firing, there had been riots in Srinagar and Kashmir also. The Sangam Bridge had been burned down. And many Kashmiris, they deposed before the commission. The Kashmiri Pandit Society as a whole also made their deposition. And at that point of time, they alleged that the mob ransacked their houses, looted their house, they thrashed the men, and they heaped insults on women which cannot be described in words. These are the words which they used. Now it is for your imagination that in 1930, what was that insult heaped upon the women which could not be spoken of, which could not be given words? There is much debate these days also that this it's alleged that rapes took place. It's conjectured that what the Pandits were referring to were the rapes. But they did. It's in the Glancy report. So nobody can deny nothing has been cooked up or made up. But Glancy also made certain recommendations. Among the recommendations was that there should be some kind of reservation for the Muslims. There should be a representative government of some kind. Now, when we say representative government, it cannot be the kind which we have today everywhere in a democracy. Representative government in Kashmir, in Jammu and Kashmir, will be the same at par, a little less, little more than what it was in other princely states of the country. Expecting in 1930 to the monarch to become a constitutional head and hand over all the power to the people, that was not going to happen. And that is not to expect of anybody. So one of the first constitutions was also drawn up. Glancy, in fact, he recommended a number of measures that ought to be taken in this regard. This is one reform which the Maharaja took very seriously. As I said, please don't try to judge the past, the values that existed then. He made a number of changes in the constitution. As time progressed, he was on the verge of becoming, in 1945, he was on the verge of becoming a constitutional head. But his prime minister, he wanted that B.N. Rao, that the changes should take place immediately. And the Maharaja was of the opinion that let us prepare the people gradually for this kind of radical change before I hand over power to the people. Anyway, that proposal was left undone. It remained like any other state, any other princely state in the country, that there was a prime minister or a diwan. There were ministers from the elected bodies. In fact, in 1944, two National Conference ministers were part of the government, then one of them being Mirza Afzal. But I'm getting ahead of the subject. Let's get back to the 1930s. Sheikh Abdullah, after that incident of Abdul Qadir, and I must also say that Abdul Qadir vanished after that. Nobody knows where he is. The man who instigated the whole state, whole region to rise up in revolt, nobody commemorates him. Nobody knows who he is. Nobody knows from where did he come or from where did he go. That is one word that he belonged to the British intelligence. Though the national conference later, or Muslim conference at that time, Muslim conference, they suggested that he was a plant of the Ahmadiyya Muslims. But that doesn't gel with the whole narrative. The fact that he vanished, the fact that you were swayed by his speech to such a degree that you rose against your king, that shows that he had some influence on you, and you, knowing who he was, you must trace him. You must be indebted to him for bringing about so much of change, from dispelling the fear amongst the Kashmiris forever. That was the beginning. But the beginning was in the communal soil. The party which Sheikh Abdullah created was Muslim Conference. Obviously, this party was almost a mirror image of India's Muslim League, which Jinnah headed. In this, Jinnah also would not have liked to see anybody but himself. He was also a messianic figure, that he only can lead the Indian Muslims. He only has the authority to speak on behalf of the Indian Muslims. But then Sheikh Abdullah was equally convinced that he had the authority, he had the right to speak on behalf of the Kashmiri Muslims. With the passage of time, when Sheikh Abdullah came in contact with Jawaharlal Nehru and other nationalist leaders, it was realized that this narrow-minded political philosophy was not acceptable. The country will never support a party which is the mirror image of Muslim League of India, which is bent upon breaking the country. So they prevailed upon him to adopt a nationalist agenda. The result was National Conference was born in 1937, if I remember correctly the date. In 1937, Muslim Conference became National Conference. There were 177 or 76 delegates present there when this resolution was passed and adopted, and 172 supported the change of nomenclature. With National Conference emerging, it was similar to many other political parties which were agitating in other princely states. Now, mind you, none of them was agitating for the removal of the king. They were all agitating for a representation of the people in governance of their states. Everywhere, some agreed to co-opt the people, like Travancore, Mysore, and Jammu and Kashmir. In fact, almost all the states, they had their own constitutions, according to which they transferred limited authority to the people, the representatives of the people who were acting as ministers. Jammu and Kashmir, the difficulty was that the name did not change the character of the party. Repeatedly, the National Conference leaders, they would say that Kashmir was acquired by Gulab Singh as a sale deed, through a sale deed. It's okay. I'll concede that it was acquired through a sale deed. And this sale deed was against the will of the people. Then the easiest course for us is to declare that sale deed as null and void, illegal. Let us get rid of it. So if we do that, what happens then? What happens is that Kashmir becomes Kashmir and Jammu becomes Jammu. And what was Jammu before 1846? Jammu was Jammu, Ladakh, Gilgit, Baltistan. There was no Kashmir. So if National Kashmir wanted to nullify the sale deed of 1846, they have Kashmir and leave Jammu and Ladakh and Baltistan to the dynasty which conquered it. There wasn't a sale deed. That was the blood and lives of thousands of people there. This clash has remained till date. It has not been resolved. And I don't think it will be resolved anytime in near future. But National Conference did change this. Uh, that name was changed and it appeared to be a nationalist party, but under the garb of nationalism, it remained what it was. Now, there's another very interesting aspect to it, and that is that the World War began in 1939. India also, a little bit later, became part of the war effort, but Congress refused to cooperate with the war effort. And so did many nationalist people everywhere. But Muslim League, they cooperated with the Britishers in the war effort. The National Conference did not do anything during this period, during the war period. During the war period, Congress had launched Quit India movement. National Conference did not launch any agitation of that kind. Neither Quit Kashmir, nor did it lend any support, physical support to the Quit India movement in the rest of the country. You can surmise that why it did it. But no sooner had the war come to an end that the Quit Kashmir movement was launched. The Congress had launched Quit India movement, asking the foreigners to leave the land so that Indians could choose their own government. The conference was asking the local Maharaja to quit the land. In land, they say Jammu and Kashmir, they didn't say that quit Kashmir only. If it was quit Kashmir, then they should have been happy that let Maharaja remain in charge of Jammu, Ladakh, etc. But Kashmir should be left to them for governors. They didn't ask that. Here things came to a boil because he was arrested, Sheikh Abdullah, and Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru took it upon himself that he should be released immediately. So he came to Kashmir. He sent a telegram informing that he was coming. Telegraphically, he was informed that it would be indivisible if he does not. Because a few years before Nehru, even Jinnah had come to the valley, and there was a very unsavory incident where he was hooted and booed away from the valley. Because the valley was as attached to Sheikh Abdullah as the rest of the Muslims might have been attached to Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Since that was a mistake which Maharaja realized that allowing Jinnah to come to the state was wrong, so he barred Jawaharlal Nehru from coming to the state. Jawaharlal Nehru tried to force his way through the Kuala Bridge. The result was that he was taken into protective custody, taken to the Dak Bungalow, and asked to leave. Now, this was a very crucial period for the rest of the country as well, because the change was in the offing. It was known that Britishers were about to leave, and the presence of Nehru for meetings in Delhi was absolutely essential. And here Nehru was caught in a storm in the valley. Ultimately, he did go back. But I too would like to believe that he bore that lifelong grudge against Maharaja Hari Singh for daring to stop him from entering Kashmir. Now, Kashmir, Abdullah has mentioned in his autobiography that what was Kashmir to Nehru and what Kashmir was to Sheikh Abdullah. In that context, he wrote that there were two suitors wooing the same woman. Nehru thought that Kashmir belonged to him, and Abdullah thought that Kashmir belonged to him. That is why both of them were very possessive of Kashmir. So with this kind of belief, Abdullah ought to know the mind of Jawaharlal Nehru regarding Kashmir. So I believe that what he wrote was his true, real assessment of the attraction which Kashmir held for Pandit Nehru. This grudge he bore till the time when Maharaja was not only ousted from the valley, but also when the Maharaja wrote a memorandum to the President of India in 1952, and when Yuvraj Karan Singh tried to seek the opinion of Nehru regarding that memorandum, he was just dismissive, saying your father lives in a different kind of world. It can be partly true, but not wholly true. So the Maharaja, his troubles were cast in iron after that. And there's no point in pursuing it further because the subject now changes with the accession approaching. Everything begins to change. But this is the background of Maharaja's troubles. They began in 1930 in a nutshell, and they continued till the end. They began with, it's very difficult to say why he did that, but he did take on the resident and the Britishers as soon as he had become the king. Other kings would not have done that. Nobody else did that. But then he always believed that his state was different from other princely states. It did not have the same kind of relationship with the British Crown. There was an independent treaty with the state even before 1857. In fact, legally speaking, the Jammu and Kashmir state as a legal entity came into existence in 1846 with the Treaty of Amritsar. India came into a legal existence only in 1919 when it was a signatory to the Treaty of Versailles after the First World War. So that kind of confidence or belief, if Maharaja Hari Singh nurtured, I would grant it to him. He had some right over that belief. But then it can also be said that changing times, one must realize who's the master and one must realize when to step back. He went whole hog, and that is how the problem of Gilgit also arose. In 1930, the troubles began when the riots took place in Kashmir and the killings of 13 people. And then the continuous pressure on Maharaja that Gilgit should be leased out to the British, that was there. That again is part of that same great game which we talked about last Saturday. The great game in which this region was a pivot, and British wanted to exploit that pivot to the fullest extent. Gilgit had ultimately to be leased out in 1936 to the British. And when the lease was cancelled prematurely, when the Britishers were about to go on 1st August 1947, the fact was that the state was not ready to have control over Gilgit. I think that this topic is a very lengthy topic. This is one part, the beginning of the troubles of Maharaja. This session, I think we should stop here. We can have interaction with each other. Any questions, or if somebody wants to make a comment, I'm sure Mr. Sharma will be eager to make a comment. So will Mr. Jandyal and others too who are plugged in. For the rest 15 minutes, if we interact, I will also learn, gain something, and all of us will be to some advantage, I believe. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for your precious time and for giving us all this knowledge again today. It was lovely to know more about Maharaja Hari Singh Ji, about Abdul Qadir episode, about Sheikh Abdullah Jinnah and Nehru Ji. We got so much enlightened today. Now we would like to ask anybody in our audience have any questions, please, this is the time. You can unmute yourselves and you can ask the question directly to Harbans sir.
As my name was mentioned, I thought probably I must register my attendance. That is present, sir. It's a pleasure again. Really, really, as I said last time, कि मैं study history, पंजाब और कश्मीर के साथ जो relationship थी, उसमें थोड़ा पढ़ा या study किया अपने university days में. As I said last time कि history कौन लिखता है, कब लिखता है, किसके लिए लिखता है,
Yes.
वो एक influence है mind में. मिडल ईस्ट से बाबर आए, उससे पहले मुस्लिम इन्वेडर्स आए, उन्होंने हिंदुस्तान की हिस्ट्री, उसमें कन्वर्शन अपने तरीके से लाए. मेरा एक सवाल है जो मुझे बहुत देर से दिमाग में खटकता रहता है कि उस हिस्ट्री से लर्न करने के बाद, जैसे आप जैसे हिस्टोरियन who going to write, somebody will contradict that, will not agree with you. I'm not the one who doesn't agree with you. I see that your analysis are more true to the fact, as you yourself said that you judge the situation by the environment of that day rather than compare that with today. You look at everything in today's terms. How best we can educate not the Kashmiri Hindus and the Kashmiri Muslims or the Jammu and Kashmiri people, the rest of the country, that they need to wake up to the present situation so that it cannot be repeated what happened until now. We don't want to see how best we can stop more Pandits leaving Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir. But I wanted to say it other way around. The Indians can move into Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir as part of the nation. How best we can educate people? Can it be the education system to be changed? Should there be a political movement or a conflict which partially we see when I'm sitting in Britain? Lalit and other friends will know that we always discuss how the Pandits has suffered, and we get the attack from another section who will say, no, you are a Hindus, that's why you are talking about. It's the other way around. It's the Muslims who are suffering in Jammu and Kashmir rather than Hindus or Pandits suffer. So how, in your own judgment as an historian, what would you give us some directions to make the change, to bring the true history and truth amongst all of us so that we can live peacefully.
Thank you very much, Sharmaji. Very interesting comment you have made, and very interesting question you have raised. Few years ago, I did a book on Sufis, the state, power, and the society. I tried to analyze the interlinkages and influences of one upon the other. I had heard, but I wasn't sure, but for the first time I realized that large number of conversion that has taken place in this country was brought about by the Sufis.
Yeah.
In other words, by very peaceful means. Why was that peaceful means? Because a large section of the Hindus have remained in the past out of the pale of the state. State has hardly cared for them ever. That is why Tulsidas also wrote that ko drip hoi hame kya hani. कौन राजा बनता है, हमें क्या नुकसान है? हमारी फेट तो वही रहेगी जो पहले थी. It's not going to change. The fate will change only of the dynasties, only of the ruling class. As reading the life of Genghis Khan, I realized that the rise of Genghis Khan was a threat to whom? The feudal class of that time in Central Asia, the priestly class of Central Asia. And it's a very interesting coincidence that with the rise of Genghis Khan, the saints from Central Asia, they started migrating towards India. Because the footprints of Islam were already present there in India right at the beginning. Muhammad bin Qasim had come soon after Prophet Muhammad. So they thought that it was right for them. But then vast majority in this country was of Hindus, and only a minority of Muslims was ruling them. How do they rule that? How do they control them? When there is a rebellion, they'll obviously massacre. They'll terrorize the people. They'll terrorize them into submission. But you can terrorize people into submission, but you cannot make them active participants in the governance of the state, in the running of the state. For that, you have to seek their cooperation. So there have been Muslim monarchs who were egalitarian, who were liberal, who co-opted Hindus. Some of them co-opted with them because of the greed for power or the desire to gain some advantage. But a large number of them were left to their own devices. Their personal faith was not touched. And this is how this country evolved. In other words, people need to look after all the segments of the people. If a minority is ruling, it has to take care of the majority. If the majority is ruling, it cannot ride roughshod over the minorities, because it will create problems. Sooner or later, it's going to bust, and it bursts in a very negative and destructive kind of manner. Our education has to be such that which teaches how best any society can move, irrespective of the religions that we might follow. Now, you have touched a very raw subject, raw nerve regarding the migration of the Pandits and the suffering of the Muslims. To be honest, I find both are there, and in large quantities, massive quantities, which create emotional outbursts from both the sides. It's very difficult to argue with either of the two. And it's impossible to tell them to forget some of the mistakes of the past. Earlier, just before we started, Mr. Jandial asked me if when is my next book going to come out? I said that it was interrupted because of last year's abrogation of Article 370 because it changed all this. I had to recalibrate some of the things. But then I have been struggled for almost a year, and I can say with all honesty that I think that I have done fair justice to both the sections. The Kashmiri Muslims also, they have also suffered, and the Pandits, they should never have been allowed to migrate. They should never have been forced to migrate. That is unforgivable. In your own country, at a time when there is democracy, your own government, if such an event happens, that is worse than what happened in 1940s with the Jews of Germany.
Yeah.
So having said that, we educate our people, make them more liberal, not less liberal. I will be treading on toes, but my honest opinion is that can anybody define what is Hinduism? None of us can define Hinduism. We will go into polemics, we'll go into a deep philosophy, confusing each other even more than we started, when we started. So that has to be left for individual to follow whatever religion, whatever ritual one wants to have. But as a society, we need to be tolerant. A tolerant society is that in which everybody has a fair representation, where its aspirations are taken care of. Now, why is it that in barring this recent disturbance in UK regarding the Black Lives Matter, why are so many communities, they have been existing for almost a century now there? Why was it that all along, when communists were barred in many countries, communists were living in UK? Karl Marx, in fact, he did all his work in UK.
And died in UK.
So that depends upon the kind of people and the kind of government that you have. If you accommodate more and more people, there is a greater chance of peace and peaceful coexistence. And if we try to impose our will over others, or if we try to find that how precedence can be given to my point of view and not the other point, then obviously there will be clash. And then finally one can say that mankind is made for conflicts. One conflict will be resolved and there will be another conflict. That conflict will become status quo and another conflict will come as a counterpoise to that status quo.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Any other questions from any of the people attending right now? We would love to take any questions.
Can I come in?
Yes, Jindyal Sahab, we can hear you now.
Prasad, I just want to make two observations. One is that you mentioned about the arrest of stopping the Pandit Nehru from proceeding to Srinagar to plead the case of Sheikh Abdullah. He was prevented at the Kohala Bridge. Just an observation to compare treatment meted out to Pandit Nehru by Maharaja Hari Singh or his administration and the treatment meted out by Sheikh Abdullah's administration to Shama Prasad Mukherjee in a similar way, and when he was detained at Lakhanpur on the Ravi Bridge. In fact, I would be happy if people start making a comparison of these two events. Maharaja Hari Singh's administration made Pandit Nehru comfortable at a guest house at Kohala itself. It was a forest guest house. And after 2 days stay, he was given a vehicle and sent back to back. Whereas in case of Shama Prasad Mukherjee, he was dumped in a jeep and taken to all the way to Srinagar and dumped in a hut, and where he ultimately, unfortunately, died about 20 or 30 days later. Just an observation to that incident, it came to my mind.
No, you are absolutely right. I'll be dealing with this issue
Okay.
during
Good.
one of my forthcoming lectures.
Okay.
Not the next one, but after that, when we come down to the making of the constitution, including the state constitution, I'll be dealing with this issue. And you are absolutely right. This is a very ironic juxtaposition of the two arrests.
Yeah.
I agree with you here.
Yeah. The second observation, not only observation, but in fact, I will enlist your comments also. You have rightly pointed out what actually has happened on 13 July 1931, and the narrative at that point of time, and since then rather, they became the martyrs, which actually they were not, as far as we are concerned. There was no concerted effort on the part of the royal family, or for that matter, even on the Dogras, to present the correct position of that incident, and in fact make an effort to take away the respectability of a martyr given to them. It's a great of the Modi administration, or for that matter, it's one of my demand in my articles, that Jammu does not treat them as martyrs. They were the violators, and they had to be dealt with that. Similarly, many people have died in Kashmir in 90s when they attacked the security forces. The number had gone even to more than 40. They never became the martyr to people. For us, they are terrorists, and even for them in Kashmiri, I don't think they were a real martyr, because nobody knows their name except for the leaders, the terrorist leaders. Why they were shy? Even I must say, after the Sheikh Abdullah was arrested, no sincere effort was made to correct this part of the history and take away the title of martyr from them. How do you react to this?
You have raised two questions. First, about Maharaja, that nobody made efforts.
I said royal family. It could be anybody.
There was hardly anybody. He was the only person there.
But he had a forces. He had an army. He had a public relation network.
Yes. I'm coming to that. So they cannot be. The army cannot be equated with the dynasty. They are two separate entities.
No, army. I'm saying police, because it was the blame on the forces.
Yeah, the failure.
Maharaja did not kill them. It is the forces who fired.
I repeatedly say that it's very easy for us, with the advantage of hindsight, to make judgments. And I always say that judge a person, judge an event by the values of those times. Even the human right violations, they have to be judged by what kind of society was present there. Maharaja, to my mind, again, I'm saying that with the advantage of hindsight, he was not a very good person at communicating with people.
Okay.
He was of a reserved nature. more given to just having his commands followed. So it was left to the advisors, and I have written that in my book also, that his advisors, they failed, his intelligence department, that failed. Now intelligence, these are all intelligence failures. If such a upheaval is about to take place in the state, or even today, if such a gigantic uh, bomb attack is about to take place anywhere in the state, and if the intelligence agencies are unable to have a clue, it's a huge failure on the part of the state as well as the intelligence failures. In this case, the Dogra advisors, I do not have a very high opinion of them. They were living in the perfected glory of the Maharaja in the past. The result was that either Dr. Karan Singh, when Maharaja Hari Singh book was being released, some people criticized that he spoke like that, but one of the comments which he made was that one of the flaws of feudalism is that people tell you what you want to listen. They don't tell you the truth. They anticipate that this is of your liking, this advice will be appreciated. And therefore, they simply give that advice. Many of them, I believe they were, if I'm to judge them by my standard today, I would say they were hangers-on. So hangers-on can never be very good advisors. They can be good company, they can be very good social company they can give you, they can be very good public relations men socially for you, but on matters of serious matters of the state, they are utter failures. So this is a failure which has to be conceded, admitted, that more could have been done in changing the narrative. But then more could have been done to anticipate this incident and take preventive steps. This was not taken. It was an absolute and total failure of the intelligence and the administration of the state. The second, what was Mr. General?
The second part is that even after the incident or even after independence,
Yes.
we continue to glorify the martyrs, even Jammuwalas.
Yes. The General Sahab, you ought to know much better than me. And I am a great critic of people of Jammu of the 50s. Even the creative writing, you look at the literature of that period of the 50s, and you will find that the problem of Jammu is absolutely absent from the creative mind of the people. There is not even a single story, single essay, single poem which depicts what happened to the people of Jammu when a sudden change took place, when they were deprived of their power and privilege and their lands. We can say that it was a desired change, but a desired change happens upon human beings, and human beings react. A whole generation has been lost. The generation of the early 50s, that according to me was lost. I've seen people prematurely dying because of becoming alcoholics, because they just could not adjust to the new life which emerged after 1947, particularly after 1949, when the Maharaja left the state. Those who were 18 or 19 years old, they wasted their whole life. And those who did well, they ignored this. They excised this problem out of their minds. They just allowed things to drift as they were. And then there is always that fear. Today we can say, and we are not sure that how things are going to happen or change during the next 2 years or 10 years. So let us not be very happy at this moment that everything has been solved. I feel the problem is still there. How this will turn out, we'll see. I will not prejudge that event. But yes, we allowed to drift it. We allowed the narrative to be hijacked by the Kashmiris. And that is how it remains. Everybody is guilty, not only the governments of the time, but people also. It is only recently that you will recall very well that it was only after 1990s that this narrative in Jammu started changing. Before 1990s, nobody bothered about Martyrs' Day. ठीक है, it's okay, छुट्टी है, बैठो. That's all. So the reaction against the Martyrs' Day is a recent phenomenon. 90s and late 90s, as a reaction to what was happening.
So that's what I'm saying. We accepted the narrative.
Yeah, yes.
That is unfortunate.
At that time, we accepted the narrative.
Thank you, sir.
We have now Govardhan Singh, sir, Major General Govardhan Singh Jamwal, sir. He would like to ask something, sir. Your mic is unmuted.
Hello.
Jaidev, sir.
Again, it was a wonderful talk, and I think the right time that we have started looking back, and what you were just discussing, and Harbans Singh ji is absolutely right. I always say that one generation, that is 47 to another 25 years, that generation we have lost. We did nothing. I think we were politically not at all ready for what happened. Kashmiris were ready, so they exploited everything. And Jammu did not exploit, in fact, didn't take part in the politics. Praja Parishad started with a very slow movement. It took a lot of time. And I think that was the reason why we missed out at same level with the Kashmiris. That's what I feel.
You're right, sir. Had we been ready, things would have been different.
But unfortunately, we are still not ready. I
won't comment on that.
And today also, we talk differently, and still we have not been able to manage our affairs in Jammu. And the political leadership is again failing us today. It's very unfortunate. And whatever comes from Delhi, it's okay. But what is our contribution? What are we doing? Now you saw Kashmiris have produced another party a few days back, and they are still moving ahead. And where are we in Jammu? I mean, that is the frank thing that we have not learned from these 72 years. That's what I feel.
You're right, sir.
Another point about the 1931 agitation, what Harbans Singh ji pointed out, being from the J&K state forces, I have studied the army history, military history. Of course, that time the forces were called by the deputy commissioner or somebody who was controlling the show, and army had to do whatever they had to do. But I feel, what I have studied, you must have studied the British context. You have brought out very well that they have been always wanting to trouble Maharaja Hari Singh, somewhere or the other, right from very beginning. In fact, they were doing this in Maharaja Ranveer Singh's time also, and Pratap Singh's time. They did so much damage. Maharaja Hari Singh, I think he must have been trying, Dogra, he feels inside. So what had happened to Pratap Singh? He wanted to pay them back. Again, it didn't work. That's what one reason is. And secondly, the British were too strong. They had managed, they had planned everything. In fact, later on, I went to Mirpur. I was a young little boy. I saw in Mirpur, I have seen those kind of the Muslim agitations which were brought about from the Pakistan side. That time Pakistan wasn't there, it was all in India. But what they created, it could not be done without the British policy because that was the British India. So it was all done by British. Sheikh was only by name, I can tell you that. So therefore, Maharaja or anybody could not handle that. And they imposed and imposed everything. As you yourself had said, Maharaja Hari Singh justice was his religion. He brought out so well that in fact he did everything for the Muslims for first 10, 15 years. Then how these people suddenly forget everything? It was, I think, the British influence which put us in trouble all the time, all the time. Thank you. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Any other questions? Anybody else would like to ask? Hemendra Sharma ji has raised his hand. I think he has a question. I'm unmuting Hemendra ji.
Hi, Jai Mata Di to all of you.
Jai Mata.
Thank you so much, and such a beautiful talk, Sambhal sir. Sorry, Sambhal sir. पहले तो थोड़ा लास्ट बार पिछली बार तो जड़ा है कि तो सांबे दा जड़ी गल कीती कि बड़े कंडी दा इलाका ते बड़े लोग ने. I still remember in late 80s where we were driving down from Punjab to Jammu and the car broke down. ते सांबे खड़ोइए असें गड्डी उन्हें रेडिएटर च पानी पाना पौंदा हा ते उत्थे खड़ोइए ढाबा खुले दा हा ते उन्हें बड़ा छड़े दा जवाब दिता हा कि इत्थे नहीं थोंदा पानी पूनी. That was the condition of Samba. I still remember. It was still late 80s also. So मेरा एक क्वेश्चन है कि जो अपना मतलब कि जड़ी कम्युनिटीज की गल उठी है, कश्मीरी मुस्लिम्स, कश्मीरी पंडित, हर एक दा रोल है. But what was the role played by the Punjabis who were brought as Lahorias and Pashorias who were brought by the Maharaja into J&K and settled down, the Chopras, the Kalras, the so many Sethis and all these people, and what was their contribution? I see them all turning turtle. कि उनका behavior जड़ा है कि they all were favoring national conference.
You see, this is, as I said in the beginning, when education is there, other things also need to be there to complement education.
Right, sir.
Not only Chopras and other Punjabis, there were Dogras also. Gazalal Dogra was there. He was a very active member of the National Conference. Now, these people were not there because of communalism. They were there because of their genuine belief that radical left changes will be brought in by the ouster of the Maharaja. The monarchy should come to an end. They were educated and they were leftists. They were I won't use the word communist, but they were in fact hardcore leftist thinking people. Leftist thinking people would definitely oppose any monarchical order. That is part of their character. One should not attribute anything else to that. The fact is that there were Kashmiri Pandits also who were supporting National Conference, not when it was Muslim Conference, but once it became National Conference, most of the Kashmiri Pandits, they supported National Conference. Only the serving class that wasn't supporting it. But the true colors would emerge only if the Maharaja went over and supported them. But the truth is that they did. There were many when Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru came to Kohala, crossed the Kohala Bridge. I think the grandfather of Sandeep Bamzai, who has written that book, Bonfire of Kashmiriyat, he came here as a representative of the Blitz. So Kashmiri Pandits, the educated class which was in the rest of the country, they were all supporting National Conference. Only the tradition-bound Kashmiri Pandits, they remained with Maharaja. So one shouldn't hold that grudge. It's a different matter that after 47 things began to change. Things changed because the question was India and Pakistan. And then the Pandits, obviously, they would choose a nationalist party. And for choosing a national party, you will have to sever your relationship with the regional party, that is National Conference, and hitch your fate with Indian National Congress at that time. The result was that the Kashmiri Pandits also became a target of the Muslims. So these are things which are beyond our control. Nobody can control them. These are forces of history that happen. Sometimes we get victimized. Innocent people get victimized. Sometimes great changes take place when such events take place. Nobody can accuse Girdharilal Dograji of anything but being a nationalist. So being with National Conference should not be held against him. He was a communist-minded person. That is why he supported the land reforms. And land reforms, whether we like it or not, the fact is that it gave a new identity to the landless scheduled castes of the state. I have witnessed that. I know it personally, and I have no grudge that this thing happened. So these things happen, they are part of the social political life of a society.
And one more doubt that I have is that was there any connection between the Russians and the Maharaja?
No, not at all. No, not at all. Never. There never was. The only thing that Maharaja Ranveer Singh did was that he tried to make inroads into Central Asia. For that, he had used not only W.V. Johnson, but also his own envoys, traders. Traders were used for this purpose. But his purpose was trading, the commerce, raising revenue for the state, and nothing beyond that. Nothing should be read more than that. The only thing is that the British were so scared of the Russian shadows.
Yeah.
The Russians were not there, their shadows were there. They were scared of those shadows. And that is why they imagined enemies which did not exist.
And so
I hope that has
also, if you
answered.
could, in some of your next, because I think the time would be short now, so if you could elaborate on some of the, what was the role of the politicians on the Mirpur and Muzaffarabad side, because I think they are politically more mature even than the Kashmiris.
They, you must give them credit that they were closer to Punjab.
Yeah.
And all over the country, there has been a divide between princely ruled states and the British ruled states. What is the grudge of Telangana against Andhra Pradesh? Both are Andhrites. Both are Telugu speaking. But Telangana was ruled by the Nizam. and the rule of Nizam was slightly backward looking, as all princes would be. Don't expect the princes to be as liberal as a democratically elected government. It won't be there. So in
It can't be
our
because
state
it's an
also,
autocratic rule. Yeah.
Mirpur, the area of Mirpur was closer to Punjab. They had more connections with Punjab in every regard. And therefore they were ahead of us. Our education came in 1905. The Lahore College was established long back.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Harbansji. Thank you, everybody
My
who's
pleasure.
attending.
My pleasure.
And we will see everybody again next Saturday to continue our discussion on Sada Itihas.
Looking forward.
Thank
Thank you.